Welcome to the Disaster Recovery webinar. My name's Faith Kitchen and I'm the Heritage Director for Ecclesiastical. So over the next 30 minutes we're going to cover some of the key issues and concerns for the heritage sector, what to think about in a loss scenario and how to respond in a loss scenario and how to recover well from a loss. So firstly, what are the key issues and concerns for the heritage sector? Well, as you can see, the number one concern is the impact of a major fire, along with big risks such as the cost of building maintenance and repair, health and safety, reputation and security of assets. The impact of a major weather incident, again, comes in the top 10 at number 6, and business continuity also makes the top 10 list. 43% of clients are also concerned about the cost of skilled craftsmen, and over half of heritage clients have no idea how long it would take to rebuild their property, with half thinking it would be less than 2 years. And around about 50% haven't had a valuation in the last 3 years. So this is our research, from our research that we've completed over the last 3 years. So what should the heritage sector be thinking about in a loss scenario? Okay, well, firstly, we need to think about what is a loss scenario and what might happen in the heritage sector. So if we look at the definition of disaster and what a disaster is, I particularly like the last bit there on the slide, an event or fact that has unfortunate consequences. And that might be both physical and non-physical in today's world. So it could be the impact of a major fire or a major flood, freeze event, or it could be a cyber attack or a cyber incident. And they're all disasters that heritage sector need to be aware of and also prepared for. So let's just imagine you're called out to work in the early hours of the morning. There's been a serious fire. It's not business as usual. The picture there is Clarendon Park in April 2015. The fire brigade is still struggling to control the fire. There's not going to be access available anytime soon. Was there something in the building that you now wish you had? And just look at how many fire brigade crew members it takes just to get one large picture frame out. How many items do you think you could grab in an emergency? Ideally, you'd have thought about 1 or 2 before the event, so that you can have a good response and a quick recovery. The main issues are prevention and planning. And if you've got a really strong plan and a really good view on how you might prevent the losses occurring in the first place, then your response and recovery is going to be far quicker and far more effective. So what do we mean by prevention? Well, I mean assessing the risks and the threats, and that's all different types of risks and threats that might threaten you or disrupt your business in some way. And actually, how can you attempt to reduce or remove those, or even transfer them to somebody else? Planning, by planning we mean preparing a disaster recovery plan, identifying both the roles and responsibilities of your team, your staff, your volunteers, creating snatch lists for your treasures, and supporting networks and training staff. And then your response. By response we mean your immediate plan, so what you're going to do in the aftermath of a real disaster. How do you assess and stabilise the situation? And then how do you carry out recovery? How do you carry out the salvage process to ensure operations return to normal as quickly as possible? So you could have the best disaster plan in the world, but let's face it, we'd rather not test it, and we'd rather focus on preventing the event occurring in the first place. So how do we best do that? Well, firstly, the knowledge you and your staff and volunteers have of your building, its contents, collections, the time critical areas and the operations that you rely on most will be really helpful in this process. Looking also at historical data may also be useful to see what risks have affected your business in the past before. And you can have a look and see if you think that might happen again. So the first stage really is to really assess your risks. And then you might want to look at how you score them. So you can look at each area for the premises and specific activities, not just your own, but also those of neighbours too, and note all the significant hazards and any existing safety measures. Scoring your collated risks by both likelihood and severity is a really simple way of helping you prioritise your time and money on mitigating your risks. Also, thinking about the type of prevention tools available to you is worth spending some real time on to find the right solution for you and your building and activities and contents. There is so much new technology available these days, so it's definitely worth speaking to your insurer, broker and surveyor too. And then once you've looked at your risks and you've agreed to how to manage them, you need to make sure that you've got a regular programme of inspection, maintenance and also review of your risks too. We normally recommend an annual review of all your sort of risk mitigation programmes. So once you've got all your items plotted against frequency and severity, you can use the risk score then to decide which risks you want to completely avoid, which you'd like to mitigate or transfer, or those as well that you just need to accept. There may be processes or activities that you may wish to stop entirely, such as, for example, shutting down or stopping the use of your staff using USB sticks, for example, to protect yourself from cyber risks. Or there might be implemented controls such as an incident plan, training or system controls, encryption, anti-malware, for example, as well. Even after these actions have been completed, there still may be some activities that can be controlled or the financial repercussions are too great for you and for your own organisation's risk appetite. So then it's time to consider risk transfer options such as insurance. And then ultimately there may be a number of risks where you just have to accept them. There aren't potentially opportunities for mitigation or transfer, but actually it's still an activity that's core to your business operations, and the outcome is greater than the cost of transferring. So there are some risks that you will just have to accept. But one of the things you can look at is the risk transfer, and it's really important to have a look at how you can get the cover right for your organisation. Many heritage organisations don't consider what would happen to them if they had a major loss of their collection, for example, and 25% don't know what their collection is worth either. Time is often given to getting the building sum assured right and the building's cover correct. However, as we know, business continuity is a top 10 concern. So we want to make sure that clients are looking and getting the cover right for their operations. So yes, your building's insurance is really important and getting the sum assured is important. But what if you're a tenant? And actually one of the things that we do find with tenants is actually that sometimes debris removal is overlooked as a cover and should be considered by tenants of properties if in case they are responsible for the removal of debris in a claim situation, which we have seen happen before. So that's something definitely to think about. Also, making sure you've got your contents cover right is important. So your stock and cover for items on loan that you may have in your organisation, and making sure that you understand that the theft cover, is it full theft cover or is it subject to forcible and violent entry or exit? Collections, valuations are really important. We always recommend, depending on the size of your collection, but getting a regular valuation, so maybe every 3 to 5 years, certainly of your sort of largest items. Whether or not you want to put them on an agreed basis, that would be especially important, or market value. And keeping an inventory, and one of the things we always recommend is taking photographs of all of your collections, so that if anything is lost, then it's really easy for us to either restore or help repair it with that sort of information you've got there in terms of photographic evidence as well. And also if there is a major theft as well, it really helps in those sorts of situations too. And the most important one probably to think about is loss of revenue and increased cost of working. This is where we do see not all organisations consider the cover correctly for themselves there. And actually, in the event of a loss, this is a cover that they can really rely on to help them with their recovery. So having an adequate sum insured, but also an adequate indemnity period is really, really helpful and important for clients here too. And consider both also cyber cover and terrorism cover, depending on where your organisation is located. This may or may not be important for you. So moving on to planning, it's worth taking time here to look at a range of different scenarios and plan your response to each one of them. So going back to our scenario, what would happen if a large event was due to take place tonight? What happens if the press arrive on your doorstep and visitors are asking you, is your site open? Is the event on? People start asking for refunds and it's now pouring with rain. Of course, there is an answer. It's the business continuity or disaster recovery plan. Firstly, the facts. Customers need both adequate business interruption cover and an effective business continuity plan in place to maximise the chances of them surviving a serious business interruption. So a business continuity plan is the overarching plan, and a disaster recovery plan is just a small part of that to deal with a specific situation. Business continuity plans are longer term plans and deal with the whole of the recovery process, whereas a disaster recovery plan will actually just cover the first 24 or 48 hours of an incident occurring. So you might have several disaster recovery plans, but only one business continuity plan. It is definitely vital that organisations take the development and maintenance of business continuity planning seriously. It's not one of those tasks that can be put off, because a disaster, as we know, can strike at any time. And as we said as well, business continuity planning is sometimes confused with disaster recovery planning, but they are very separate. As I said, the disaster recovery plan is a small part of the business continuity plan. The disaster recovery plans are usually quite technical and focus on the absolute recovery of specific operations and functions and sites, services or applications. So it should also be designed to deal with the initial emergency situation, after which the business continuity plan would then cut in to restore the business back to normal operations. Unfortunately, the stats are quite hard hitting. 80% of organisations with a tried and tested business continuity plan are likely to survive a major interruption, but only 20% without a plan are likely to survive. 90% of organisations that suffer a significant data loss are not in business 2 years later. So definitely worth spending time in this area, critical area. So disaster recovery plan may be used by your staff, your volunteers, or even by the emergency service as well. And they're really there to minimise harm and damage to people and things, be that your buildings and contents or your staff, volunteers or visitors. One of the critical areas is to outline roles and responsibilities. So it's important in an emergency to know who is in charge and who is making decisions, and also who is responsible for things such as dealing with the press, and also who's the welfare officer, making sure that everybody else is okay. Human life should always be a first concern, ensuring people are safe and in no imminent danger. You may have animals to consider and precious objects or historical artefacts to try and preserve or minimise damage. So where do you take them out of danger? Your emergency plan should look to cover 48 hours and should cover the key actions, information, equipment needed, such as snatch lists, and we'll cover those in a bit more detail in a minute. A communications plan is incredibly important. News does tend to go on Twitter first, and you do need to appoint someone to manage your social media response and also to manage your different stakeholder groups. You may have trustees, or you may have visitors or events planned in that you need to communicate with all those different groups of people, and they may all need slightly different messages. Do check your current policy cover as well for any support you may have, because a number of policy covers will cover crisis management and give some cover for PR support in those situations as well. Public relations is very important, even though it may seem the last thing you need to worry about. But certainly a reassuring message heard by customers and suppliers and an air of professionalism can really be created out of a disaster. Then plan your recovery and train. Make sure your staff, your volunteers and the emergency service are effectively trained on your plan. So the fire service will come out and they will look through your plan with you, and you can have really good engagement with fire service as well to help understand what needs to be prioritised in the event of a disaster or loss. Then we need to plan recovery. It does require an awful lot of thinking about and engagement with the board and trustees. How will you want to recover? Do you have agreements in place with others in the local community to store your salvage, for example, if you do suffer a loss? We have seen a number of customers use village halls and school halls in the event of an emergency to help look after their precious objects as well. And it's good to have these agreed in advance, so you're not, it's not another thing to worry about when actually a disaster does occur. Think about your plan itself, number it, and also archive older versions as well, and just make sure everyone knows exactly what version they've got and is well trained in using it and what their role is. So the plan itself should be prepared in consultation with stakeholders. It should be version controlled. It should also be stored securely in multiple locations and available to those who will need it, alongside other key information such as snatch lists and cards and context for the emergency services, your insurance, etc. Should be tested, and that can be both desktop tested, but also you can do a live scenario involving other agencies such as the fire service and police as well, and should be regularly updated. Should be part of your regular training, and also of course your induction training as well for any new starters or volunteers. And as we mentioned before, I can't stress how important photographs are as well in helping recover. Do also think about GDPR for any personal details contained or phone numbers contained within, and make sure you've got permission to use those in that way, and also make sure that when volunteers and staff leave or move on, there is a process in place to make sure that's managed in terms of their personal information too. So what is a snatch list and what does it do? So after personal safety issues have been addressed in a disaster situation, salvage becomes your next priority. What can you save? And would you know how to prioritise, woven materials, for example, over paintings? A snatch list is a good way to establish a logical order for the extraction of items. It should only be done, though, when the building is safe to enter or whilst you're on your way out, if there is time to do so. Staff should also be aware of where your professional valuations are stored and kept. So as you can see, a snatch card should give a really good view on and should have a photograph of the item, where it's located, a short description. Often these are laminated and given to the fire service to go and extract after a disaster or a loss. So the font should be big enough to see through, a firefighter's equipment. They may be wearing goggles and things like that. So they should be of a decent size and should be very clear and easy to read. It should also contain really easy instructions about how you best remove it, and also where any equipment you might need, whether that's a particular screwdriver or whether or not you're just cutting a painting out of the frame. That should all be made very, very clear in that snatch list. So let's move on to the response. The knowledge you and your staff and volunteers have is really helpful as well in a response situation. So what should you do? Well, other than grabbing your plan off the shelf or from on your phone or wherever it's actually stored, raise the alarm, contact the emergency services, neighbours, if it's a fire or something that might affect neighbouring properties as well, make sure they're aware. Contact your broker insurer. Be aware of any hazardous material that you might need to flag with people. Evacuate where necessary. Use your evacuation procedures. Snatch those priority pieces, distribute any personal protection equipment, and shut down utilities if you can. Then coordinate your response activity. So where do you assemble people? How do you administer first aid? Where's your emergency salvage area? How will you store your salvage? What's the weather like? What's the time of day? Arrange additional security if your site is compromised. There's been a number of issues where volunteers or members of the public have come to help in a salvage scenario, and actually items of value have disappeared in the sort of melee and panic of the whole situation. So you need to be really careful about labelling your salvage and making sure that it's kept under close watch and attention at all times. Communicate. The nominated team members should be managing this, but you need to keep that check on social media and make sure you're informing stakeholders and giving the right messages out to volunteers and others as well, other interested parties. So in terms of salvage, When it's safe to go in recovery items, do you know where you'd like them to be taking them to? How are you going to label them and record the salvaged items? How are you going to record the condition of items and disaster recovery companies and conservators? So, there may be contamination issues and you may need to take advice on that as well. Definitely need to have some sort of order for condition as well, for things that are completely, going to need a lot of work, or things that are actually okay pretty much and just need to be stored somewhere safely. Disaster recovery companies can offer secure salvage as well and take care of collections, but you may often or sometimes need a subscription in place before an event occurs, so it is worth thinking about that in advance. Also, if you don't have an in-house conservator, it's good to build a relationship in advance with someone who's familiar with your collection as well and can understand how best to recover it. What sort of response should you expect from your insurance company? Well, we certainly strive to provide early acceptance of policy liability and to use appropriate loss adjusters for the particular loss. We will also look to involve disaster recovery specialists with vast experience in all manner of losses and work with customers to ensure the right experts are involved and to find the right solutions. We'll also provide interim payments to make sure that there's no stress in terms of the financial position, and we'll look at recovering losses for you from negligent third parties too. So we do have the expertise and flexibility to work with our customers to ensure that they have the right cover should the worst happen, pay the right settlement, ideally not a penny less or a penny more. So what would we actually do? Well, we always look to attend site at the earliest possible time with our appointed loss adjuster. We look to provide reassurance and to confirm policy liability. We'll look at discussing the immediate actions with you. How can we help? How can we get the right people for you to recover you as quickly as possible? We'll appoint appropriate third parties such as restorers or curators to provide advice and work in conjunction with your own specialists. And we'll also have regular contact, primarily through the loss adjuster. And we can always attend committee meetings as well if this is helpful for you. So in terms of recovery, the road to recovery can be short or long. We hope short, but depending on the type of situation, it can take time to recover. So firstly, can you return to your premises? Even when there's no structural damage, it may take time. Dehumidifiers may need to be used to stabilise temperature and humidity, for example. Where a building is suffered structural damage, your insurer surveyors will advise on the extent of the damage, your options, your next steps and timescales, and that will be in consultation with the fire brigade and other authorities as well. There could be consultation and planning, so you might need to put in new planning. So that's with the local planning authority and the relevant statutory organisations such as CADU and Historic England. National amenity bodies such as the Georgian Group or Victorian Society as well may also be involved in that consultation. Conservation experts and your local community and neighbours as well will also need to be consulted, and that's something we always recommend doing quite proactively, because we have seen situations where actually neighbours in the local community have objected to new plans, and actually with the right engagement, the planning process can be a lot quicker and with a lot less disruption as well. In our experience, it can take many years to restore large buildings, particularly listed buildings as well. So the communication is really important. It's really good to keep everybody updated, whether it's your neighbours, the public, or your potential future visitors again as well, on the progress and what you're doing. I've seen a number of different ways where this has been done really effectively to keep the community engaged in the restoration process and to keep them up to date with what's going on. Even in the situation with Clarendon Park, actually, they still allowed children and adults to come and have a look at the restoration work whilst it's in progress and put little portholes in so that people could have a look and see what was happening. And that was a great way of engaging the local community. Review, reassess and refresh. So just keep records as well throughout the process. What decisions were made, by whom, when, because this is all helpful when you come to review the recovery process afterwards and look for learnings. Really helps that process too. So just as an example, this is one that Ecclesiastical were involved in. We insured the Surrey Infantry Museum, which actually was a tenant in Clandon Park, which, as you will know, suffered an extraordinary and terrible fire in April 2015. The fire was discovered in the electrical distribution equipment cupboard and spread out from there, quickly taking hold and destroying the mansion. So in terms of the restoration process, there was a medal collection significantly impacted and damaged in the significant fire. So there were several phases to that restoration process. So phase one was decontamination, so breakdown of large segments of melted mass and identifying the actual medal and the owner. And then phase three was all about how do we restore it. We actually appointed Farcrofts, one of our parties that we work with for restoration here, and they did a fantastic job, as you can see from the next picture, in terms of restoring the medals. So the pictures on the right hand side of the slide here show at the bottom the medals as they after the phase two in terms of recovery, and then how they were actually restored ultimately. So a fantastic job can be done in terms of the restoration process if you use the right experts. But what have been our learnings from disaster recovery? Well, actually for us, some of the learnings have been getting the right cover. So removal of debris cover, if you are a tenant as well, still really important to buy. Items on loan, making sure they are adequately insured and also accounted for in any stats list or planning. You may need to update your disaster recovery plans when you get items on loan inwards as well. Making sure you've got the best business interruption cover for your organisation, making sure you've got the length of period of time and also the right amount of money to help support you in the time it takes you to recover from a loss. We know a number of organisations don't recover if they don't have the business interruption cover and a decent business continuity plan. We do appreciate the abilities of your own specialists as well. They have great knowledge of your building, your collection, and also and are really supportive and helpful in the event of a loss and can help you recover in the best way, but also help you identify the risks and are really important in that planning and prevention stage too. Decision-making process. Again, it might be something to think about with trustees and boards beforehand, to really think about what you would do in the event of a loss, and a major loss at that as well. Think about some different scenarios and think about what you might do and the key decisions you might want to take for your organisation in the event of something like that happening. This can actually pay dividends in terms of time and getting you recovered more quickly after something's happened. And finally, planning and record keeping as well. Really can't underestimate the good value of having a really good plan in place, but also keeping up to date, and also good record keeping of decisions and a decisions log in the event of a disaster happening. We hope that worse doesn't happen to you though. However, there is further guidance and support available on our website. We've got a new disaster recovery plan, so it's a guide and notes for you on our website. And also Ecclesiastical customers can access our risk advice helpline for further information on 0345 600 7531 or email for any further advice or support they may need. Thank you for listening.